You have been held to a stricter standard than the people around you, and nobody has ever admitted it out loud. I want to start there, because I think you felt that for years and never had permission to say it. You watch people cut corners and land on their feet. You watch them lie a little, drift a little, take the easy road, and life just lets them go. Nothing catches up. Nothing collapses. They post the pictures. They get the promotion. They sleep fine. And you? You do one thing halfway. One, and the ceiling comes down on your head. Stay with me on this one all the way through, and I mean that seriously. Don't play this in the background while you answer messages. Because the first half of what I'm about to tell you is going to sound like bad news, and the second half is going to reverse it completely. If you leave in the middle, you will walk away with exactly the wrong conclusion about your own life. Here's what I've watched happen to people like you, over and over, in kitchens and church parking lots and hospital hallways. You skip your prayer time for 4 days, and you feel it in your bones like a physical weight. Somebody else hasn't prayed since Easter, and they're doing great. You tell one small lie to protect yourself, and it unravels in front of the exact person you were protecting yourself from. Somebody else builds their whole life on a story that isn't true, and gets invited to speak about integrity. You hold a grudge for a week, and you can't sleep. Other people hold grudges for decades, and call it a personality. You have quietly begun to suspect that God likes them better than He likes you. I need to tell you what's actually happening, and it is not what you think. You are not being punished more. You are being trained harder. And there is a world of difference between those two things. But nobody explains the difference. So people like you spend 15, 20 years thinking heaven is angry with them, when heaven has actually been closer to them than to almost anyone in the building. Let me put it a way you'll never forget. When a builder puts up a house, there are walls that hold weight and walls that don't. Some of those walls are decoration. They divide a room. They hold a picture frame. They make the hallway look finished. And there are other walls, a few of them, that hold the entire second floor. Every ounce of it. The roof, the beams, the people sleeping upstairs. Now, when the inspector comes through, he doesn't treat those two kinds of walls the same. He doesn't even pretend to. He walks past the decorative ones with barely a glance. And then he stops at the load-bearing wall, and he leans on it, and he tests it, and he checks the footing under it, and he does the thing that looks unkind. He puts weight on it on purpose, to see what it does under stress. Nobody stress tests decoration. Think about that for a second. The wall that gets the pressure isn't the wall that failed. It's the wall the whole house is depending on. And here's what most people miss, and it's the part I want you to carry out of here today. The wall never knows it's load-bearing. It doesn't get told. It just feels the weight and assumes something is wrong with it. That's you. That has been you for a long time. You've interpreted every hard season as evidence of failure, when a whole lot of it has been evidence of assignment. You've been reading the pressure as rejection. The pressure was placement. Now I want to be careful here, because I'm not going to hand you a flattering story and send you home. That's not what this is. There is a real difference between a person who is being trained and a person who keeps stepping on the same rake and calling it spiritual warfare. We're going to deal with that too, honestly, before we're done. I'm not going to let you leave here thinking every consequence you've earned was a divine assignment. But before we get there, I need to fix something in how you're reading your own life. There's a line in Hebrews that gets read at funerals and hard times, and almost always gets read wrong. The Lord disciplines the one He loves, and chastens every son he receives. Most people hear that verse and picture a belt. They picture God as a father in a bad mood, waiting in the dark for you to mess up so he can make you pay for it. And if that's the picture in your head, then every hard thing that happens to you is going to feel like a verdict. Every closed door is a sentence. Every delay is a fine you're paying for something you did in your 20s. But that's not the word being used, and it's not the picture being painted. The discipline being described there is the discipline of a household raising an heir. It's not a courtroom. It's a home. It's the thing a father does with a son he intends to hand something to. Correction, instruction, repetition, standards, expectations, the whole slow business of turning a child into somebody who can be trusted with the family name. And here's the difference that changes everything. Punishment looks backward. Training looks forward. Punishment is about what you did. Training is about what you're going to be handed. If God were punishing you, the weight would be tied to your past. But the weight you're carrying isn't sized to your worst moment. It's sized to your assignment. That's why it feels like too much, because it is more than your history requires. It's exactly what your future requires. You've been reading your life like a sentence being served. It's been a curriculum. Now let me show you a woman most people skip right over, because her story is buried in the middle of a chapter about a rude man and a hungry army. And if you blink, you'll miss the most important thing about her. Her name was Abigail, and she was married to a man named Nabal, which in that language literally meant fool. That was the name he carried, and the scripture says plainly that he lived up to it. Harsh, mean-spirited, impossible to talk to. His own servants said it out loud. Nobody can speak to him. That was the household. That was her every single day. Now think about what that life actually looked like. Not the dramatic version, the daily one. Waking up next to a man who would embarrass her in front of people and not notice. Managing a large estate where every decision had to be made around his temper. Learning which hours he was reachable and which ones he wasn't. Learning to read a room in 4 seconds, because the cost of misreading it was the whole rest of the day. Learning how to move quickly and quietly and get things done without setting off the explosion. Years of that. Years of what any of us would call a wasted life. Years where I promise you she prayed and got no answer she could see. She was intelligent. She was capable. She was wise. And every bit of it was being spent absorbing shock in a house that would never appreciate it. She had every reason to believe God had forgotten her address. But here's where it turns. David is out in the wilderness with 600 hungry men. He's already been anointed king, but he's living like a fugitive. And his men have protected Nabal's flocks all season for free. So David sends a polite request for food. And Nabal, being exactly who he is, insults him in front of the messengers. David does what a young man with a sword and a grievance does. He straps on his blade and tells 400 men to mount up. He is about to slaughter an entire household over an insult. The future king of Israel is about to permanently stain his own hands 2 chapters before his coronation. And there is nobody in the world who can stop him, except one woman who spent years learning how to defuse a furious man. A servant runs to Abigail. And watch what she does. She doesn't panic. She doesn't cry. She doesn't call a meeting. The text says she made haste. She loaded donkeys with bread and wine and grain and figs. She went down the mountain by the covered side so she'd meet him before he crested the hill. And she got off the donkey and put herself on the ground in front of 400 armed men. And then she talked. And what came out of her mouth was one of the most skillful speeches in the entire Bible. She took the blame that wasn't hers. She reminded him who he was going to be. She told him Essentially, that a man about to be king cannot afford this particular stain on his record, and that one day he would look back and be grateful that his hands were clean. David stopped. 400 men turned around, and David said out loud, "Blessed be your discernment." Now I want you to see something, and I want you to sit in it for a second. Every single skill she used that day was forged in the house she'd been begging God to get her out of. The speed, the reading of a dangerous man, the ability to speak truth to power without triggering rage, the steadiness under threat, the instinct to move before the situation finished developing. She didn't learn any of that in a good marriage. She learned it in a hard one. God did not remove her from Nabal's house. He was building something in her inside Nabal's house that would one day save the anointed king of Israel from destroying himself. She thought those years were a punishment. They were the training. There's a woman I think about who works overnight at a distribution center outside Toledo. She's been there 11 years. She's the one they call when something goes wrong at 3 in the morning, and she's never once been named in a meeting. She told me she'd stopped asking God for a better job and started asking him why he kept handing her the broken shifts. And what settled on her, standing at that conveyor line, was one sentence: "Because you don't drop things." That's what I mean. The reason the standard is higher on you is not that God is stricter with you. It's that he is closer to you. Correction is a function of nearness. A stranger's kid can act up in the grocery store, and you don't say a word. You're not raising that child. Your own kid does the same thing, 4 feet from you, and you're on it before it finishes happening. Not because you love yours less, because yours is yours. You have been feeling the nearness and calling it disapproval. And I'll tell you something else that nobody says. Sometimes the discipline of God is not that he does something to you. Sometimes it's that he does nothing. He goes quiet. And that silence will do more to a person than any hardship. Let me show you the hardest scene in the Gospels for me personally. A woman comes to Jesus, a Gentile, a Canaanite, a Syrophoenician woman, an outsider by every category that mattered to that crowd. Her daughter is tormented, and she is out of options. And she starts calling out to him in the street. And Jesus, the same Jesus who healed people he'd never been asked to heal, who stopped funerals in the middle of the road, says nothing to her. Not one word. The text is almost uncomfortable about it. He answered her not a word. Then his own disciples ask him to send her away because she's making a scene. And when he finally speaks, what he says lands harder than the silence did. He tells her he was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He tells her it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Now hold on, because if you only read that far, you'll walk away thinking Jesus was cruel to a desperate mother, and that is not what happened. Watch what she does with it. She doesn't leave. She doesn't crumble. She catches the word he used and turns it into an argument. Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. And Jesus stops, and he says the thing he said to almost no one: "O woman, great is your faith. Be it unto you even as you will." Here's what I believe happened in that street. The delay was not rejection. The delay was extraction. He was pulling something out of her that only pressure could pull out. If he had healed the girl in the first 10 seconds, that mother would have gone home with a healthy daughter and nothing else. Instead, she went home with a healthy daughter and a faith that Jesus himself called great in front of witnesses. She got the miracle, and she got the identity. The silence built the woman. The word only fixed the problem. And I want you to consider that the silence you've been sitting in for the last year or 2 years or 7 years might not be God turning his face away. It might be him waiting to see what comes out of you when the easy answer doesn't come. Now I promised you honesty, so here it is. Not everything that hurts you is discipline. I won't let you leave here believing that. Some of what you've suffered is just the world being broken, and it carries no message and no lesson. Some of it was done to you by people who will answer to God for it, and it was never yours to learn from. And some of it, I have to say this plainly, because I love you enough, to some of it is consequence. You made a decision, and the decision came back around, and calling that a divine test is a way of avoiding the repair work. If you can't tell the difference right now, that's normal, and that's what wise people around you are for. Talk to somebody who knows you. Some things need a pastor. Some things need a doctor. Some things need an apology you've been avoiding for 4 years. But here's the thread that holds all of it together, and I want you to hear it clearly. God does not waste a single ounce of it. He doesn't author every wound. He redeems everyone he's allowed to touch. There is no category of pain in your history that he is unable to convert into something that serves the assignment. Not the ones he sent. Not the ones he permitted. Not even the ones you caused. I'll tell you my own version of it, quickly, because I don't think I have the right to say any of this to you without putting my own name on it. My name is George, and there was a stretch of about 5 years where I could not get anything to work. I mean, anything. Every plan I made came apart in my hands, and the thing that broke me wasn't the failure, it was watching men I knew. Men who weren't carrying half of what I was carrying sail right past me. I stood in my own driveway one night after another door closed, and I said out loud, God, what did I do? I was 39 before somebody older than me put it a different way. He said, George, you keep asking what you did. Ask what he's building. Then he said the sentence that took me another year to accept. God is not slowing you down. He is thickening you. And when the thing I'd been waiting for finally came, it came heavier than I'd imagined it. And I understood in about a week why he hadn't handed it to me at 32. I would have dropped it. I did not have the arms yet. God does not move things without purpose. If this message reached you today, there was a reason before you ever clicked. The secret protocol carries the 7 keys that reveal what was deposited in you before your birth, and what the Spirit is beginning to awaken in this exact season. The full audiobook is included to walk with you in your quiet moments. And the Awakening Map, as a bonus unveiling the 5 stages of spiritual awakening, where you have been, where you are, and what is coming. Link pinned in the first comment. But divine windows do not stay open indefinitely. That isn't me selling you something. That's me handing you the map I didn't have in my driveway that night. Now let me take you to a man whose whole life was severity, because I think he's the one you'll see yourself in. His name was Jephthah, and before he did one single thing right or wrong, he was already disqualified. His mother was a woman nobody in that town would name in polite conversation. His half-brothers had the same father he did, and when they got old enough to do something about it, they threw him out of the house. They told him to his face, "You will not inherit here. You are the son of another woman." He didn't lose the inheritance because he failed. He lost it before he was old enough to try. So he goes and lives in a place called Tob, out past the edge of everything. And the Bible says vain men gathered to him. The word means empty men. Men with nothing. The ones nobody else wanted. That was his congregation. Rejects and leftovers, and men with no future, out in rough country. And Jephthah learns to lead them, learns to feed them, learns to fight with a force that has no resources and no reputation and no backing from home. Years of that. Years of being the family's shame, running a band of nobodies in the wilderness. And then Ammon comes against Israel. And the elders of Gilead, the same men from the same town, some of them related to the brothers who threw him out, get in the road and go find him. And they ask him to come be their captain. And Jephthah says the most human thing in the entire book of Judges. He says, "Didn't you hate me? Didn't you drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now that you're in trouble? Read that and tell me you've never felt it." He goes back, and the man who was thrown out becomes the man who leads them. Not in spite of the wilderness, because of it. Where do you think he learned to command men with nothing? Not in his father's house. He learned it in Tob, with the empty men, in the years he thought were the ruins of his life. Now, I'll be straight with you about Jephthah. He was not a polished man. He made a rash vow later that cost him more than he ever meant to pay, and Scripture doesn't clean that up. Being used by God is not the same as being finished. That's part of the point. God works with hard men shaped by hard roads while they're still being shaped. But hear this, because it's the peace the enemy has been keeping from you. The disqualification was not the end of his story. It was the location of his training. And that brings me to something I have to correct, because it gets passed around a lot in these circles, and it's half a truth, which is more dangerous than a lie. You've probably heard somebody quote Psalm 82, I said. You are God's. All of you are children of the Most High. And use it to say that the highest state of a chosen one is to become a god. I understand why that's attractive. But look at where that verse actually sits. God is standing in the middle of a courtroom, rebuking corrupt judges, men who had real authority delegated to them, and used it to crush the poor. And the very next line, the one nobody quotes, is, "But you shall die like men, and fall like one of the princes." That's not a promotion. That's a warning about what happens when someone carries delegated authority and forgets whose it is. So let me tell you what your highest state actually is, because it's better than the version you were sold. It isn't becoming a god. It's bearing a likeness. It's the family resemblance showing up in you so strongly that people who've never opened a Bible start recognizing something in the way you handle money, the way you handle being wronged, the way you handle a room full of people who can do nothing for you. You were not made to become divine. You were made to become recognizable. I know a man in North Carolina who runs a small crew, 3 trucks, drywall and paint. Last spring, a supplier shorted him on an order and then lied about it in writing. He had every receipt. He could have buried the man. He called him instead, told him what he had, and then told him he'd eat half the cost so the guy's business wouldn't fold. One of his own guys asked him why on earth he did that. He said, "Because 6 years ago somebody did it for me, and I've been waiting to pass it on." That's the family resemblance. Nobody preached at anybody. A young man on a job site outside Charlotte just watched somebody handle a loss the way Christ handles a loss. And it went into him. And it will come out of him someday. And that is exactly what the pressure has been doing. Nobody develops the character of Christ in a comfortable season. It has never happened once. Patience is not built in a life where nothing waits. Mercy is not built in a life where nothing has to be forgiven. Steadiness is not built where nothing shakes. Every trait you admire in the people you trust most was installed in a room they would not have chosen. There was an old man in Jerusalem named Simeon. We know almost nothing about him. No title, no office, no following. Just a promise. He had been told he would not see death before he saw the Lord's Christ. Now imagine carrying that. Imagine being told that as a young man, and then living an entire ordinary life with it, decades of temple visits, decades of nothing, Decades of watching other men build houses and reputations, while you carried a promise you couldn't prove, and couldn't explain, and couldn't schedule. Every year the promise got heavier and less believable. Every year somebody probably asked him if he still believed that old story about himself. And then, one ordinary morning, a poor couple walks in with a baby and 2 pigeons, the offering people brought when they couldn't afford a lamb. Nobody in that courtyard looked twice, and Simeon crossed the floor and took the child out of that young mother's arms. Think about what it took to still be there, still showing up, still expectant at that age, after that much silence. That's the whole thing right there. God didn't give Simeon an easier life. He gave him a longer wait and a heavier promise, and on the morning it finally arrived, his arms were steady enough to hold it. Yours are being made steady right now. That is what all of this wait has been for. Every ounce of it. So here's what I want from you before you go. And I want something specific. Not a word of agreement. Tell me the age you were the first time you noticed the double standard. Not the story, just the number. The first time you did the exact thing everyone else was doing, and you were the only one it came back on. Maybe you were 9, and you were the one the teacher caught. Maybe you were 26, and you were the one who got called into the office. Put that age in the comments, and then put one word beside it for what that season ended up building in you. One age. One word. That's it. I read those. And I'll tell you why I'm asking. Because when you see 40 other people put a number and a word under this video, you are going to realize you were never being singled out for punishment. You were being pulled aside for preparation. And so were they. And none of you knew. And remember, everything I spoke about goes deeper inside the secret protocol. Pinned in the first comment. The 7 keys, the audiobook, and the awakening map are there waiting for you whenever you're ready to take the next step. Simeon held that baby with arms that had been waiting so long everybody assumed they were empty. They were never empty. They were being made strong enough for the day.